At 88 years old, Robert Redford has finally opened up about the one chapter of his life he never truly closed: the day his wife walked away. Behind the fame, the awards, and the image of Hollywood's golden boy, there was heartbreak, loss, and a love that slipped away. Why did the woman who knew him before the world did leave? Was it the pressure of fame, quiet betrayals, or something deeper? In this video, we uncover the true story behind their love, their pain, and his final confession. Stay with us, because the truth is more emotional than any of his films. How it all began. Robert Redford was not yet a household name. In fact, he was barely getting by. Long before movie premieres and red carpets, there was just a boy with a sketch pad and a dream. It was during this humble chapter of his life that he met the woman who would become his first great love, Lola Van Wagenen. They met in Los Angeles in the mid-1950s, far from the flashing cameras that would one day define his life. Lola was young, vibrant, deeply intelligent, and devoted to causes that mattered. Robert was struck, not just by her beauty, but by her conviction. "I saw her on a show and thought, that's it," he would later say. "I'm taking the chance." And he did. The two bonded quickly over art, the environment, and a sense of purpose that made their connection feel bigger than romance. It felt like destiny. By 1958, they were married, not in Beverly Hills or under stage lights, but quietly, with real intention. They were just two people trying to figure life out. Their early years were modest. Money was tight. Robert was still trying to make it as an actor, and Lola supported them both emotionally and practically. There was struggle, yes, but also a deep well of hope. They believed in each other. Their shared love for nature and social causes kept them close. They weren't chasing fame. They were chasing something more meaningful, a life built together, with values at the center. Robert would later say of Lola, "She believed in me before the world even knew my name." That kind of belief, pure and unwavering, is rare. But life was about to change. Fame was knocking, and everything that came next would test the bond they had built in those early, quieter days. As Robert's talent began to catch the world's attention, the couple found themselves standing on the edge of something extraordinary. But with great success comes even greater pressure. And soon, their love story would be placed under the harshest spotlight of all: Hollywood fame. The rise of a Hollywood icon. Robert Redford's career took off like wildfire in the 1960s. He moved to New York to study acting, and soon landed stage roles that caught critics' attention. His big break came with the Broadway hit Barefoot in the Park, which later became a film starring him and Jane Fonda. It was clear Robert had that something special: good looks, sharp timing, and undeniable screen presence. From War Hunt to Inside Daisy Clover, Redford became Hollywood's new golden boy. He was charming, clean-cut, and talented, a director's dream, and a magazine editor's favorite face. Stardom didn't take long, but with every poster and public appearance, the man who had once walked hand in hand with his wife through uncertain times now found himself walking red carpets alone. Fame changed everything. The couple who once shared their mornings over coffee now barely shared the same zip code. Robert's schedule became relentless. Lola, always supportive, chose to stay out of the spotlight. She raised their children, kept the house steady, and managed the growing demands of being a star's wife with quiet strength. She never wanted the attention, one friend said. She just wanted her family to feel grounded. But as Redford's star rose higher, the space between them began to widen. What started as two partners building a life became a balancing act between two very different worlds. And the higher he climbed, the harder it was to come back down to where they began. Behind every glamorous magazine cover and Hollywood headline was a marriage slowly bending under the weight of fame, and it was about to bend even further, with personal loss, public pressure, and growing emotional distance. A marriage tested by stardom. In the glittering chaos of Hollywood, maintaining a private life is like trying to hold water in your hands. For Robert and Lola, the cracks in their marriage began to show. What once felt like a quiet, shared mission now felt like two people drifting silently apart. The media was relentless. Paparazzi followed Redford everywhere, and the pressure to stay relevant in an industry that demands constant evolution kept him away from home more often than not. Lola was left to manage life behind the scenes, raising their kids, protecting their privacy, and weathering the rumors. Redford himself once reflected, "Fame is like a river. It sweeps you off your feet before you realize you're not standing on solid ground anymore." The solid ground of his marriage was disappearing. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months apart. Conversations became brief. Intimacy gave way to exhaustion. Those close to the couple noticed the silence. "They were growing apart," said one longtime friend, and didn't even realize it until they were already standing on opposite shores. They were still a family, still connected by love and respect. But connection isn't always enough. Sometimes the distance isn't measured in miles, but in missed moments, unspoken thoughts, and too many empty chairs at dinner. Just as they were trying to hold everything together, life handed them the most devastating blow imaginable, and it would change them both forever. Tragedy that shaped them. In 1959, just a year after their wedding, Robert and Lola Redford experienced a loss that no parent should ever have to endure. Their infant son, Scott, died from sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. He was just 2.5 months old. The tragedy was sudden, inexplicable, and utterly life-shattering. Redford has rarely spoken about it, but when he did, the pain was still evident. "That kind of loss changes you forever," he said quietly in an interview years later. "You don't come back from it the same." For Redford, the grief was internalized. He buried himself in his work, perhaps as a way to escape the weight of something too heavy to carry aloud. For Lola, the grief became a different journey. She became the emotional anchor for the family, strong, present, and quietly resilient. This unimaginable loss shaped both their paths in different ways. It brought them closer in moments of shared grief, but also created a silent distance. Sometimes trauma unites. Other times, it pushes people in opposite directions. For Robert and Lola, it did both. In the public eye, they were poised, but behind closed doors, they were parents who had lost a child, and there is no script for how to survive that. As the years passed, they tried to find purpose in the pain. But even shared values couldn't always keep two people walking the same path, especially when those paths began to diverge. Shared activism, separate lives. During the 1970s, Lola began to carve her own identity. Away from the title of Mrs. Redford, she became a passionate environmental activist and a champion of sustainability. Her work was impactful and deeply personal, often tied to the values she and Robert once shared. But while she moved forward with quiet determination, Robert's life pulled him deeper into Hollywood. They still believed in the same causes, but they were no longer walking side by side. Redford supported her efforts, even lent his voice and name to environmental campaigns. But their lives ran on different tracks. Hollywood's fast pace clashed with Lola's quieter, purpose-driven life. They appeared united in public. They smiled on red carpets and at charity galas. But behind the scenes, their emotional connection had started to fade. What had once been a shared dream now felt like two separate missions. She kept moving forward, a close friend once said of Lola, but they weren't moving together anymore. And while they tried to stay strong for their family, whispers began to swirl, rumors that would soon test the foundation of what was left of their love. Rumors, affairs, and Hollywood whispers. As Robert Redford's fame soared through the 1970s and 1980s, the tabloids followed closely behind. His name was constantly paired with his co-stars, especially Jane Fonda and Natalie Wood. While no public confirmations were ever made, the rumors stuck, and they stung. "Hollywood never lets you just be," Redford once said. "There's always a story being written, whether it's true or not." For Lola, the whispers were louder than the facts. She was raising their children, managing their home life, and staying far from the cameras. But no matter how private she tried to remain, the headlines eventually crept into her world. Stories of flirtations and on-set romances became harder to ignore. Though nothing was proven, the emotional impact was real. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they grew. Redford never publicly addressed the rumors. His silence only fueled speculation. Some saw it as him protecting his privacy. Others saw it as avoidance. Either way, the damage was done. Trust, once unshakable, started to crack beneath the surface. Behind closed doors, Lola focused on what she could control: her work, her children, and her personal growth. But even the strongest resolve has limits. As the whispers turned into expectations, she found herself facing a painful question. Could she keep giving to a man who was slowly becoming a stranger? When love is tested by distance and doubt, sometimes the only path left is the hardest one to take. And for Robert and Lola, that moment finally came after nearly 3 decades of shared life. The decision to end it all. In 1985, after 27 years of marriage, Robert Redford and Lola Van Wagenen quietly divorced. There were no explosive headlines, no public feuds, just two people who had once shared a life, now agreeing to part ways. It was mutual, a close friend recalled, but it wasn't painless. For Redford, the breakup was a private grief. He avoided discussing it in interviews. For a man who had spent decades under a microscope, this was one part of his life he wanted to protect. Lola, ever dignified, also chose silence. Their decision wasn't about scandal or betrayal, it was about emotional exhaustion, the kind that builds slowly over years until it becomes too heavy to ignore. They kept the split respectful, especially for their children. Co-parenting became their new reality, and despite the emotional distance, they continued to show up for their family in all the ways that mattered. They handled it with grace, said one of their longtime friends, but it was clear that a chapter had ended. And yet, in many ways, that love never fully disappeared. Redford once admitted in a rare moment of reflection, "There are things you carry, even after they're gone. You carry the memories, the mistakes, the moments you wish you could do over." With Lola no longer by his side, Robert turned to what he knew best, his work. But even as he won awards and changed the face of independent film, the echoes of a lost love never really faded. Life after Lola. The years after the divorce were some of the most professionally rewarding of Redford's life. He poured his energy into directing, producing, and launching the Sundance Institute, now the most respected independent film organization in the world. His 1981 film, Ordinary People, won him an Academy Award for Best Director, cementing his place not just as a star, but as a serious filmmaker. But personal fulfillment is a different thing entirely. Redford's public image was polished, the environmentalist, the visionary, the thinker. But those close to him noticed a quieter side, one filled with reflection and perhaps a bit of regret. "He threw himself into work," said a colleague. But there was always a sense that something personal had been left behind. Even his activism, often celebrated, seemed rooted in something deeper. Many believe his commitment to nature and social justice was connected to Lola, her influence lingering long after their marriage had ended. Their shared values had sparked his early interest, and even in her absence, those ideals remained close to his heart. He dated occasionally, but insiders often said he never really loved anyone the same way. That early love, forged before the fame, was hard to replace, and perhaps he never tried. But life has a way of surprising us. Just when Redford's fans thought he'd closed the door on love forever, a new chapter quietly began, with someone who brought a very different kind of calm to his complicated life. His second chance at love. In the 1990s, Redford met German painter Sibylle Sagers. She was creative, spiritual, and deeply connected to the natural world, qualities that spoke to parts of Redford that had been quiet for a long time. Their bond wasn't fast or flashy. It unfolded gently, over years, with little public attention. They moved in together, traveled, and eventually married in 2009. It was a private ceremony, far from Hollywood. Friends described Redford as more grounded, more at peace. He found someone who matched his pace, one insider said. It wasn't fiery, it was balanced. But even as he embraced this second act of love, Redford never denied the impact of his first. In interviews, he remained vague but honest. "Some loves define you," he once said. "They shape your heart, even if they don't last forever." Sybil gave him companionship, creativity, and stability. And though their relationship was described as happy and fulfilling, it was also different. There wasn't the same wild, youthful rush. It was quieter, more thoughtful, a reflection of the man he had become. While love offered him a second chance, fatherhood remained one of Redford's most meaningful and most complicated roles. A famous last name doesn't always make parenting easier, and in Robert's case, it came with unique challenges of its own: fame, family, and fatherhood. Behind the charm, the Oscars, and the unforgettable performances, Robert Redford was quietly trying to figure out one of the most difficult roles of all, fatherhood. While millions admired him on screen, his children were living with a very different version of the man the world thought they knew. He had 4 children: Scott, Shauna, David, and Amy. His first son, Scott, tragically passed away at just 2 months old, a wound that never fully healed. "That kind of loss changes you," Redford once shared. "You carry it. It becomes a part of you." It shaped how he approached fatherhood going forward, with both tenderness and distance. Redford was often gone filming, directing, or promoting his work. The life of a Hollywood star doesn't leave much time for PTA meetings or school recitals. His daughter Amy, who followed in his footsteps as an actress and director, later said that while her father was supportive, he was also elusive. "He cared deeply," she explained, "but sometimes it felt like he was more present in his work than in our day-to-day lives. He wasn't absent out of neglect. He was trying to juggle too many worlds. The creative pressure of being a filmmaker, the public pressure of being a star, and the private pressure of holding a family together often collided. I did my best," Redford once admitted. "Sometimes I just wasn't there, and I regret that. Still, there was love." His children speak of him with respect and affection. They knew he was doing what he could in the way he knew how. And as time passed, Redford grew closer to them, learning to show up in quieter, more meaningful ways. Long walks, one-on-one talks, or just being there. No cameras, no scripts. Balancing family and fame was never easy for Redford. He came from humble beginnings and was thrust into a life of relentless public exposure. That's not a transition many people handle perfectly. And even though he stumbled, what mattered is that he kept trying. But sometimes, it's not just about the family you build. It's about the connections that linger through the years. And one of Redford's longest, most captivating relationships wasn't with a wife at all. It was with a woman who kept reappearing in his life, both on screen and off. Her name? Jane Fonda. Robert and Jane. Throughout his career, Robert Redford shared the screen with many iconic women, but none quite like Jane Fonda. Their chemistry first lit up in 1967's Barefoot in the Park, a romantic comedy that made audiences wonder, were they acting, or was there something real behind those looks and laughs? They were young, beautiful, and wildly charismatic. But while the world speculated, Redford and Fonda always insisted they were just good friends. Still, the closeness was undeniable. They reunited again in 1979's The Electric Horseman, and decades later in 2017's Our Souls at Night, where they played 2 aging neighbors who find love in loneliness. That final film felt especially poignant, almost like a full-circle moment. Jane Fonda later revealed the truth. "I had a crush on him for years. I mean, who didn't?" But she also admitted that Redford was guarded. "He's a very private person. He doesn't like to talk about himself," she said. "That's one reason I adored him. He wasn't performing. He was just Bob." Redford called Fonda a great friend and someone he admired deeply, but he never confirmed whether their connection ever went beyond friendship. Still, their scenes together spoke volumes. The silences, the gazes, the tenderness. They weren't soulmates in the traditional sense, but maybe they were something even deeper. Two people who understood each other in ways the world never fully saw. With decades of fame, friendships, and heartbreak behind him, Robert Redford finally made a decision that surprised many. He decided it was time to step away from the spotlight. For good. Retirement and reflection. In 2018, after over 60 years in film, Redford announced his retirement from acting. His final role would be in The Old Man and the Gun, a fitting swan song about a gentleman bank robber who simply couldn't stop chasing adventure. "I thought, well, that's enough," Redford said. "It's time to walk away with dignity." The news stunned fans, but it wasn't just about age. It was about closure. For a man who built a life on stories, Redford wanted to write his final chapter on his own terms. Stepping back gave him space to reflect, not just on movies, but on life. In interviews, he became more open, even philosophical. He talked about regret, about choices, about how fame gave him everything and also took things away. "You never stop loving your past," he said. "You just learn to live with it." He stayed involved with Sundance, mentoring young filmmakers. He still supported environmental causes, still painted, still lived quietly in Utah. But the noise, the spotlight, it no longer called to him. Behind his weathered face was wisdom, a man who had finally made peace with his journey, and perhaps with the love he lost. And while Robert Redford found peace in reflection, the woman who once shared his dreams had already carved a new life of her own, on her own terms, out of the spotlight. Lola's life without Redford. After the divorce, Lola Van Wagenen didn't remarry. Instead, she poured her heart into something else: purpose. She continued her work as an environmental activist, historian, and documentary producer, passions she had nurtured even during her marriage. Far from Hollywood, she became a quiet force in the fight for sustainable living and social change. She co-founded Clio Visualizing History, a nonprofit that creates educational media about American history. Her projects weren't glamorous, but they were important. Friends described her as focused, private, and deeply committed. Unlike Redford, she shied away from interviews. She didn't need attention, just impact. Though she never spoke publicly about her past with Robert, those who knew her said the memories were still there. Not painful, not bitter, just folded into the fabric of who she became. She moved forward, one friend said, but she never forgot. And maybe that's why, even after decades apart, there was still something unspoken between them, a quiet respect, a bond built on more than just love, on history. But it wasn't until recently, at 88 years old, that Robert Redford finally let the world in on what he had held close for so long: the truth about Lola. A quiet confession at 88. In a rare interview, Robert Redford, now 88, finally said it out loud. Not with drama, not with regret, just with honesty. "She was the one who saw me before the world did," he said, referring to Lola. "Our early days, they were pure, unforgettable." It wasn't a tabloid confession. It was deeper. A man, near the end of his journey, looking back and realizing that some things never fade, not even with time, not even with fame. He didn't say he wanted her back. He didn't deny the life he had built since. But in his words, there was a soft ache. "Fame," he said, "got in the way of something real. The love was real. The loss was real. And at last, he wasn't afraid to say it. I loved her then," he admitted, "and I still love the memory of her now." So what does it all add up to? The awards, the heartbreaks, the decades of film and fame. At 88, Redford's legacy isn't just what he did on screen, but who he quietly loved behind the scenes. Legacy of a complicated love. Robert Redford's legacy isn't just about cinema. It's about love and the cost of chasing dreams. He gave us unforgettable characters, but behind every performance was a man still holding on to something deeper personal. He loved two women, one who helped him rise, the other who helped him slow down. But it's Lola, the first, the one from Utah, whose imprint never fully faded. His life was extraordinary, but his greatest truth might be the simplest, that even legends have soft spots, that even giants carry old love like a quiet scar. Fans see the strength in his success, but also the solitude in his eyes. "You can have everything," he once said, "and still feel like something's missing." And now, we know what that something was. Robert Redford's story is one of fame, love, and deep personal loss. At 88, he finally shared what so many never knew. If this touched you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Thanks for watching and for being part of a story that truly matters.